Good evening once again, everyone. Hell's Unicorn again. This evening, I'm just going to do something a little bit different from what I normally do. Normally, when I do opinion blogs regarding politics, I usually tend to focus in on some sort of specific event pertaining either to the presidential campaign, other various federal elections, or state or local politics, but it always deals with some sort of specific event or circumstance within the framework of current events. What I'm going to talk about tonight is just something that's a little bit more basic and general and deals more particularly with the way people come to form political opinions. I have this little catchphrase that I like to use whenever taking a dismissive view of a current political topic because of its inability to take into account all potential outcomes and variables, and that catchphrase is, "There is no logic in politics." When you actually break down the way that modern politics works, and basically the way that human beings work in general, this statement is somewhat of a misnomer, because basically what I'm doing is I'm stating that human beings are not dealing with politics in a logical fashion. They are not taking into account the necessary aspects of a given situation in order to come to a fully educated judgment on a situation. And to throw out an example there, I'm going to throw out the issue regarding the same-sex marriage thing, because this is something that has been coming up fairly often recently, particularly as it pertains to the dissenting views regarding mainline conservatism and neoconservatism, progressive leftism, and the supposedly non-existent third option, the libertarian viewpoint, which actually rejects both viewpoints. The viewpoint of the conservative and or neocon viewpoint rests on the assumption that it is the government's role to engage in social experimentation and social planning from the standpoint that certain behaviors, in this case specifically reproductive behavior, needs to either be subsidized or penalized depending on what the outcome is, and they take a utilitarian view basically that reproduction should be encouraged so that we have more workers either to fuel the national economy or to occupy places in the military in order to be used as cannon fodder to enforce our interests in other countries. And it all comes back to economics, basically. On the other hand, you have the progressive left view, which states that the same thing should happen, but that basically different people should be subsidized, but in the long run, basically everyone should be subsidized and should be given certain specific rewards for a number of different and unrelated reproductive and or sexual behaviors. And this is argued primarily for the sake of vote getting and for expansion of political power. I actually very strongly doubt the sincerity of most politicians in the Democratic Party when it comes to the issue of same-sex union. I think they are using homosexuals as a means to an end, and the end is more along the lines of their warped view of economics. But that's a topic for another discussion. The third view, which is the view that is ultimately it's rejected every time it's offered, is that there is a fundamental flaw in the overall premise that the government should be either subsidizing or penalizing reproductive behavior. And this is argued, as all libertarian arguments are made, from the standpoint of individual liberty. This viewpoint is rejected primarily because it doesn't conform to an existing binary paradigm, which consists of utilitarianism towards greater reproduction and utilitarianism towards an egalitarian outcome under, that's the veil, and then underneath is just mere political expediency. Rejecting the premise invites a whole new equation into things, if you want to break it down in terms of a mathematical analogy. This represents a fundamental problem in the political system as it pertains to the two-party paradigm. It is based on a very flawed interpretation of the principle of bivalence, which is more commonly known as binary reasoning. What it does is it attempts to break down a highly complex macro-political picture into an either-or scenario, true or false, basically, one party or the other. The argument from the libertarian perspective on many different areas is that things are far too complex to break it down into a simple either-or scenario, and thus, as it goes with the same-sex union argument or marriage licensing in general, the viewpoint usually taken is that because individuals are many and no actual union can be qualified as equal by any actual measurable standard, that the government should simply not be in the business of either subsidizing or penalizing these behaviors. The government should only be concerned specifically with questions of individual liberty on a universal basis. And this specifically has to do with state and federal government. Local government can be a little bit different because in that situation usually most everybody knows each other and has met each other. Whereas at the state and federal level there is a good degree of unknowns. There are people that live in Pennsylvania that I will never meet in my lifetime, let alone the rest of the country or the rest of the world. So it logically follows that from a standpoint of individual liberty, the further removed from my situation the government is, the less control they should have over my behavior. All of this ultimately hinges on the question of how do you wish to approach politics? And again, even though I'm not really a big fan of so-called fringe progressive types like Noam Chomsky, they do make a pretty good argument with regards to the analogy of sporting events and two-team gladiator episodes in particular as an analogy of the way our political system works. There is very little actual rational thought that goes into why people support one party or the other. A lot of voters tend to be single-issue oriented, if they're issue oriented at all, and thus they get a lot of other things in that package deal that they may or may not support. They either don't care about these things even though they affect other people, or more likely, they don't care about them enough to allow them to get in the way of their one single pet issue. For instance, I can't tell you how many times I've encountered loony-toony animal rights activists who vote for Democrats just because of the animal issue. They can't be bothered to concern themselves with the well-being of even other human beings that they know in their own neighborhoods. Don't really care a whit about that. Everything is focused on this one particular issue, and it's approached with a devotional extremity that borders on religious extremism, we'll just put it that way. And indeed, there is a irrational, hyper-religious nature to the way that people approach politics, particularly on the federal level. There is a slavish devotion to party, and there is very little actual parsing of individual issues within the broader platforms of these given parties. Whenever you encounter a troll on YouTube that seeks to call somebody like Ron Paul, for instance, a nut job, it can be reasonably concluded that this person is a single issue-oriented moron. And you can discover this by simply doing some calm, mild-mannered prodding. And eventually this will come to the surface. This insult is usually based on either the fact that Ron Paul supports a pure non-interventionalist foreign policy, and in the case of the neocons, you got to get the towel heads, or they don't like his economic policy because they're afraid he's going to throw grandma out the window, or he's going to take away all the poor people's food stamps, even though he says very well to the contrary that he has priorities and that the main targets of his reforms would be corporate welfare and overseas militarism, which is something that most progressives pretend to be in favor of. In actuality, I don't think they're actually in favor of these things unless someone from their particular party and or football team is the one to score the touchdown. I bring all of this up primarily because I just want to underscore the gravity of the level of ignorance that is on display within politics, both at the federal and the state level, but more so at the federal level. The larger the government, the larger the level of irrationality. And all of it stems from this notion that the principle of bivalence is universally applicable in spite of having several layers of more derivative applications. Or to put it more plainly, there is an either-or question presented with both political parties, but within each political party there are dozens, if not hundreds, of either-or questions bound up within that package. And in truth, if you wanted to get every potential either-or scenario and extract them from these two monster political parties that we have and designate a party for each possible outcome, we would have thousands of political parties. In essence, if you really, really wanted to get down to the bare essentials, the basic individual viewpoint of politics, and then build on top of it all of these different potential either-or questions, every person that could vote would be their own political party. Thus, the notion of applying the principle of bivalence in the way that it is basically put into play right now is borderlining on psychotic. It's clearly irrational. It doesn't even at a basic level attempt to take into account any of the variables within the broader packages of either of these political parties. And as a consequence, we see the insanity going on. We see 4 or 5 de facto wars going on, a couple of them referred to as such, a couple others not, despite widespread opposition. We have people that just babble and complain on and on about the evils of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs while they're typing away on their PCs or their Macs. We have people that complain that not enough people buy American, and yet they're driving around in foreign-built cars, be it Volvos or something Japanese-built. Whether or not it's built in this country or not is another question, but from my standpoint, if you're buying American, it better have the word Ford or Chevy on it, particularly if you're getting in other people's faces and being an asshole about it. And you can apply this to any scenario. There is no working logic in politics, is I guess a better term for it, because everybody is applying logic when they make a given decision, because there's always an either-or question being asked. The question is, are they applying it appropriately and properly to a given situation? And I would argue that very few people are even attempting to do that, let alone succeeding at it. People don't diversify in their news sources. People don't even bother to ask the derivative questions that actually come out of the broader question of Democrat or Republican, or one of the other parties, Green Party, Libertarian. I mean, if you actually do some research, you will find that there are actually over 100 different political parties out there. And some of them are actually very ridiculous. Some of them are single-issue-oriented political parties. As a judge of elections for my particular voting precinct here in Pennsylvania, I have actually read through the handbook for being a judge of elections, and one chapter, which consists of about 2 pages, lists all of the different political parties, and it highlights the major ones, or the ones that have more than, say, 15 or 20,000 members nationwide. Ultimately, the problem with American politics isn't necessarily that Americans are stupid, because calling Americans stupid, which is something that I was guilty of in the past, misses the point and falls into that same principle of bivalence equation. Stupid and compared to who? Compared to peasants over in Central Africa who are still speaking with cliques and have never been outside of their tribal region. Stupid in comparison to, say, Greece, who have fairly many book-savvy people but apparently can't figure out how to run an economy. Or, I mean, compared to what? So, again, whenever a broad statement is made about a very general or broad topic, there is a good chance that a fallacious version of the principle of bivalence or binary reasoning is being employed in order to come away with that conclusion. And the truth is that unconsciously, even those who would try to avoid doing this do fall into it. The question is, do we correct ourselves when we catch ourselves doing this? Because when we catch ourselves doing this, what we're doing is we're acting on a preconceived prejudice without actually analyzing all of the facts and variables involved. America's problem isn't that we're stupid. The problem is that we have a wrong-headed view about politics. And the view that we have about politics is the result of an inversion. I believe this is the result of an inversion of the concept of the one in the many. We view the many as being the one, and this gets into the issue of the Hegelian concept of morality, where the subjective becomes the objective. My arbitrary decrees, by virtue of my power, become the objective, and everybody else is subject to them. That's how we got Marxism. The truth is that we must come away with a viewpoint that the one is a part of the many, but it alone is not a sum of all the parts of the many. We must understand that while the many only exists in a conceptual sense, and in reality is simply a collection of individuals, we must understand from a universal principle that the individual is complex, but the individual is also unique. And so when two individuals are interacting with each other, we have to understand that the either-or principle cannot simply be applied in just a bold-faced manner, saying either person A is right or person B is right without any further inquiry into the specific situation. It's necessary to pull apart all of the individual threads of the spider webs in which we would call human motivations. We have to look at all the variables. We have to explore everything to the greatest depth and detail that we can before we come to a standpoint of judgment, and we draw our conclusions and move on. And until we learn to do this, and indeed until everybody else out in the world who is largely suffering under the same dilemma, only in different respects, do this, we're not really going to progress in the way that I think we would like to, and we will still find ourselves in awkward economic and political situations such as the one that we're currently in right now. I don't think that we've had a president in recent history that has been able to understand why binary reasoning, when applied in this fashion, is extremely wrong-headed. And I think this is largely the result of most of the people in this country being in the same predicament. And that's what's got to change. That's what needs to change, basically. So I hope this was elucidating for everybody who saw this. Feel free to give me any input that you might have on this, or if you have a divergent view regarding the principle of bivalence, feel free to let me know about it. I provided a link to the Wikipedia page on the concept, and it'll further elucidate exactly what it is I'm getting at here, and why basically that I've come to the conclusion that I have on this. So until the next time, with prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.